The yellow school bus is so common, it's almost invisible in plain sight. It's the color of childhood mornings and afternoon pickups. A shade so specific you'd know it anywhere. But have you ever wondered why school buses are yellow and not red, or green, or plain old white? And, more intriguingly, why nearly every school bus in North America is basically the exact same shade of yellow? Let's dig into the history, the science, and the surprising bureaucracy behind this fascinating little design choice. Welcome to the lost history of everyday things, where we explore the fascinating history behind the little things that shape our world. If you like this video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Also, if you have ideas or requests for future episodes, please put them in the comments. The story of the yellow school bus doesn't start with a paint company or a marketing campaign. It starts with a man named Dr. Frank W. Sear, a professor at Columbia University, who, in 1939, grew frustrated watching kids across the country get hauled to school in whatever vehicle happened to be available. Some rode in repurposed farm trucks. Some rode in vehicles that were barely more than wooden crates on wheels. And safety standards were basically non-existent from state to state. So Sear organized a conference in New York, bringing together engineers, educators, and paint experts from across the United States. For 1 week, they hashed out what a school bus should actually look like. And out of that meeting came a single unified color, a shade that would eventually be known across the country. Now here's where it gets interesting. The color they landed on wasn't just any yellow. It was a very specific shade originally called National School Bus Chrome, and later became National School Bus Glossy Yellow. And honestly, this one caught me off guard, because I was not aware that the color was so specific that it had a name. I always figured it was just a generic crayon box yellow that someone eyeballed and called it a day. But no, there's a literal technical name with a Pantone equivalent and everything. It's the kind of detail that sounds made up until you realize there are entire paint industry documents dedicated to it. So why yellow in the first place? It wasn't chosen because it looked cheerful or because it matched the optimism of a new school year. It was chosen because of science. Specifically, human peripheral vision research at the time suggested that yellow paired with black lettering was easier for the human eye to detect in low-light conditions. Think early mornings, foggy days, dusk when kids are waiting at the curb. The theory was that yellow sits in a sweet spot on the visible light spectrum. It's not as harsh as pure white, and it doesn't blend into foliage the way green does, and it doesn't get lost in traffic the way red can, especially for colorblind drivers who may struggle to distinguish red from green. In short, yellow stood out. It grabbed attention at the edges of your vision, even before you consciously registered what you were looking at. Black lettering on top of that yellow only made things sharper. The contrast between the two colors created what researchers called high conspicuity. Basically, a fancy way of saying your eyes cannot help but notice it, even in bad weather, even in the corner of your eye, even when you're not paying attention. That combination of yellow and black is the same reasoning behind road hazard signs, caution tape, and construction equipment. It's not a coincidence. It is deliberate design. After that 1939 conference, the standards slowly spread state by state. It wasn't mandated overnight. It took years of adoption, one school district at a time. But by the 1950s and 60s, the yellow school bus had become the unofficial, official look of American education. And eventually, Canada adopted the same standard too, which is part of why the color feels so universal across North America. Here's the part that genuinely surprised me while researching this. I did not know that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration set a standard for school bus color. I always assumed the yellow color was just a tradition that stuck around because nobody bothered to change it. But it turns out the federal government actually got involved, formalizing bus color and safety requirements decades after Sear's original conference. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which was established in 1970, eventually codified specifications for school bus construction, including color, lighting, and safety equipment. So, what began as a grassroots agreement among educators and engineers in a single conference room eventually became something closer to federal law. It's a strange kind of timeline, a color born out of a one-week meeting in 1939 that later got picked up and reinforced by an entire government agency. Of course, color alone doesn't make a bus safe. And over the decades, additional features were layered on top of that original yellow paint. Flashing red lights, extendable stop arms, crossbar guards that swing out to keep kids from walking too close to the front of the bus, and reflective striping for night visibility. None of these existed in the earliest versions of the standard. They were added over time, usually in response to tragedy, a fatal accident, a near miss, each one prompting another round of safety improvements. The yellow paint was the foundation, but the modern school bus is really the product of nearly a century of small, incremental fixes. It is also worth mentioning that not every country does this the same way. In the United Kingdom, for example, school buses are often just repurposed public transit vehicles painted in whatever livery the bus company already uses. There's no unified national yellow standard the way there is in North America. Some countries use orange, some use white with colored stripes, and some don't have dedicated school buses at all, relying instead on public transportation or walking. So, the bright yellow bus that feels like a universal childhood symbol is a distinctly American and Canadian invention, not a global one. There's also a practical economic reason the color has stuck around for so long. Once a standard exists, it becomes cheaper and easier for everyone to follow it. Paint manufacturers mass-produce National School Bus Glossy Yellow at scale, which keeps costs down for school districts. Replacement parts match easily, and drivers transitioning between districts or states already know exactly what to expect. Changing the standard now would mean repainting fleets, renegotiating supplier contracts, and retraining generations of regulatory habits. It's simply more efficient to keep doing what's already been proven to work for over 80 years. Decomposition of trust in a color sounds like an odd phrase, but that's essentially what would happen if the standard changed today. For generations, parents, pedestrians, and other drivers have been conditioned to associate that exact shade of yellow with caution. Slow down, children may be crossing. That instant recognition is itself a safety feature. The color doesn't just make the bus visible, it makes the bus meaningful. Drivers don't have to think twice about what they're looking at the second they see that yellow. Their brain already knows the context. There have been occasional proposals over the years to modernize the color scheme, add reflective panels, rethink the shape, use brighter fluorescent alternatives, and in some limited pilot programs, certain districts have experimented with high-visibility chartreuse yellow, a slightly more neon variant that shows up even better under LED streetlights and in fog. But so far, the classic glossy yellow has remained the dominant standard because switching everything nationwide would be an enormous logistical undertaking for a marginal visibility gain. Technology has crept into the modern school bus in other ways too. GPS tracking systems now let parents watch their kids' bus in real time on an app. Stop arm cameras catch drivers who illegally pass a stopped bus and automatically issue tickets. And some newer electric school buses are being piloted in select states, swapping diesel engines for battery power. But even these next-generation electric buses roll off the assembly line in that same unmistakable yellow. The technology underneath has changed dramatically. The paint on the outside has not. Culturally, the yellow school bus has become shorthand for childhood itself. It shows up in movies, television shows, and advertising as an instant visual cue for going back to school, growing up, and the small rituals of youth. Few design choices from the 1930s have survived so completely unchanged into the modern era. Most of what surrounded Sears' original conference, the trucks, the wooden benches, the inconsistent state rules, has long since disappeared. But the color he helped standardize is still rolling down suburban streets every single morning. So, the next time you see a school bus pull up to a curb, lights flashing, stop arm swinging out, you'll know there's nearly a century of safety research bureaucracy and a little bit of color theory baked into that bright yellow paint job. It's a story of one frustrated professor, a conference room full of engineers, a federal agency that eventually caught up decades later, and a shade of yellow so specific that it has its own official name. Thank you for watching this episode. If you have suggestions for our next videos, please share them in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the lost history of everyday things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, And stay tuned for more stories that surprise us with their origins, designs, and implementations passed down through generations.